Usually comes in the form of learning, assessment, resources, and that sort of thing. So learning plan.
All right. Good afternoon to everyone here, and good morning to anyone who's watching in Western Australia. Welcome to our webinar on creating advanced reports, part 3. I'm Rowan, and co-hosting this webinar is my team member, Charissa.
Hello, everyone.
Excellent. Now, earlier on in part 2 of our advanced reports webinars, we covered looking at e-learning and attendance-related reports. But today, we'll be focusing on more finance-related reports. Now, we expect a good portion of you here are probably already using aXcelerate, but for anyone joining who isn't, we hope this gives you some insight into how flexible these report building tools actually are. As usual, we monitor your questions in the stream chat and answering any that we can along the way, but for any queries we can't get to, or for those sent to us earlier via the sign up, we'll be collecting those and putting in responses in a follow-up message. Now, before we dive into looking at some of the reports for today, just want a quick review of what we looked at last time in terms of the structure of reports. So remember that reports in aXcelerate are basically a combination of filters and display fields. Filters allowing us to narrow down what you're seeing, whereas display fields determine what your results actually have. So with a filter, you're able to specify exactly out of all the stuff in aXcelerate what you need to find. For example, instead of getting a report that shows every single enrollment in the system, you could run a report with a filter of progress to say, only show me enrollments that are currently in progress, ignore all the cancelled ones. Display fields, on the other hand, are more about the output. They're what you'll see in your table of results. So although you might want to only look at students that are, say, in progress, you might want to know their names, emails, the course, and all those wonderful details, and those will need to be set up as display fields to be viewed. So as we go through today, you'll see us using both of these in concert, filters to narrow down on things, and display fields to make sure that our results are actually meaningful. We'll now get into building some reports, but I'll be handing over here to my colleague Charissa, who'll be taking us through some of the first ones to look at today.
All right, thanks, Rowan. So just a quick reminder, if you've got any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat window beside your channel. All right, let's look at running some basic finance reports that we do get lots of questions about. The first thing we're going to look at is the finance reporting relating to relevant enrollment. So often the first consideration with finance reporting is related to your enrollments, especially if your organization has a process of raising an invoice after a student has been enrolled. So this could be consisting of viewing or tracking simple information such as, has a student actually been invoiced for their course? Has anyone missed out on creating or raising an invoice after the student has been enrolled? And also maybe you want to know if the student has actually paid for their course and want to chase up any outstanding payments. So let's have a look at how to set up these two reports. All right, so once again, we're going to head to the reports and report builder section, and we are going to use our venerable class enrollments report. So over here, the class enrollments warehouse report is what we're going to be looking at. Jumping into the warehouse report. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to clear these filters, and we are going to start with a clean slate. Yep, and so let's have a look at how to set up a report that shows you whether the student has been invoiced for their course. Now, for full accredited training, these questions can pretty much addressed using this particular report. Now we're going to look at adding some filters that will show you the results. What we want to focus on is a filter called the number of invoices. So if you type NUM into the report filter search field, you will see this particular filter, which we'll select. And what we're going to do is we are going to say that equals to 0. So pretty much looking at all our enrollments with no invoices raised. Next, we want to also include a enrollment status filter, pretty much that is including in progress student. Effectively, the report will not look at any student who has cancelled. We're also going to include a rather unique filter called the class descriptor. Does not contain linked workshop ID. All right, so just type these in. This particular filter essentially excludes all your accredited workshop results. So if you're not looking to run a report based off those, you're just wanting to look at your class enrollments for full qualifications, you can include this filter as well. So don't forget that these filters can be added to your display fields just to make your report appear a lot more meaningful. And we're just going to hit the submit button. All right. So over here, this particular report is in fact returning all the students who are in progress in a course, but have not had any invoices raised against them. So this is probably a prompter for your admin staff to look at raising an invoice or, find out why an invoice hasn't been raised. All right, so that's the report for that. The next report we're going to look at is to know if your student has actually paid for their course. So let's go ahead, hit back, and let's clear the results again. We're still going to use the class enrollments warehouse report. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a filter that includes the word paid, and we're going to go with number of invoices paid. And we're going to say equals to 1. Now this relies on there only being one singular invoice for the course. Then we're also going to say that the number of invoices equals to 1. All right. So what we can do here is just making sure that we include the filters in the display fields. All right, so number of invoices equals to 1. Number of invoices, there we go. I'll just swap this around. All right, and one more, we're going to add an additional, display field of overdue so that we can actually see if there are multiple invoices relating to this particular enrollment. So let's go and look at the number of overdue invoices. All right, so let's go ahead and hit done and run the report. Okay, so over here you can see that there are a couple of students who have in fact paid their invoices. There's nothing outstanding and there's nothing coming up that's overdue. All right, so this is how you can pretty much find out if students have in fact paid for their course.
You can also use number of overdue invoices as a filter, so that way you can look up invoices that, sure, they haven't been paid yet, but only if they're actually overdue. If you've raised an invoice today, you probably won't have a student paying it immediately.
Yeah, pretty much. So depending on what sort of information you're wanting to find out from these reports, you'll set the filters accordingly. All right. Now, these are for full qualifications or for classes. What happens when you're running a short course? So for short courses, often the invoices are recorded against workshop bookings rather than class enrollments. So we are in fact going to look at a different report. If you are in fact setting up or creating workshops in aXcelerate, you can definitely achieve very similar results using the workshop bookings warehouse report. So I'm going to scroll down to the workshops area. And this is in fact the report we are after. So jumping to the warehouse version. All right, so I'm going to clear all these filters, but leave the last two remaining. So we're simply looking at all the workshops that haven't been cancelled and filtering out on the key participant status. So I'm looking at anyone who's approved and booked in my scenario. Essentially, I'm excluding anyone who's cancelled or tentative. So you'll have to set the key participant statuses to the whatever ones that apply to your scenario. Okay, so with that in mind, we are now going to include other filters. One of them being invoice mark paid, and we're going to make this yes. So we want to know that whether the student has paid for their invoice, just confirming, and also pretty much making sure that in the display fields, we try and include the similar filters we've got. So for example, marked pay, that sort of thing, just to confirm the filters that you've set. Let's go down and run the report. Okay, so over here you can see that we've returned some results. These are the students that you can confirm who've paid for the workshop. All right, so this is a pretty simple report to set up.
You can see you probably flip it as well and say invoice mark paid equals no, and then find people who haven't paid for it.
That's it. So conversely, we're going to look at the scenario Rowan just described. So you want to know which workshop participants have not paid for their invoices. So we're going to swap this to no. And once again, run the report. So you can see just 3 simple filters in there. Hit the submit button. And we've returned one student, William Gartner, who hasn't paid for the invoice. So this is probably a prompter for you to chase up William for his outstanding fees. All right, this in fact pretty much wraps up the basic reports. I'm now going to hand over to Rowan, who is going to show you how to set up the pretty much the enrollments relating to payment plans.
Yep, thank you, Charissa. So in those examples we just saw, those work quite well when there's usually just one invoice per enrollment there. Things get a little more complicated when you're making use of aXcelerate's payment plans. This gets tricky to track since the way these work is that each installment of the plan will have a new invoice. This means each enrollment will actually have multiple invoices. So the reports we've seen before may not be able to target this as the way we want. Now, when looking at payment plans, often the questions that surround this are things such as, has a student been invoiced for their installment? Have they had an invoice created and sent to them? Or has a student with a payment plan paid all their overdue installments? That sort of question. To answer this, we do need to look at a different report. So let's jump back into the system and we'll examine that now. We'll return to our reports menu. And instead of going into class enrollments, which worked fine with singular invoices, we're going to head down to aXcelerate's finance section, where we have a dedicated report for payment plan installments you can see here. So I'm going to run a warehoused version of this. And firstly, I'd just like to highlight 3 key filters which we'll be using, 2 of which are already present. One, we have the payment plan installment invoiced. This lets you know if there's an invoice created against any given installment. And this one here refers to the payment plan installment's due date. So this date here refers to the date that the invoice should be created. So it's the date for the installment itself. There's a somewhat similar sounding one known as invoice due date, like so. This refers to the date the invoice should be paid by. So this is for invoice creation, and this is for when the invoice should be paid. So rather similar, but they have different functions. Now we can use these to answer that first question. Has a student actually had an invoice raised against their installment? So for that, I'm going to remove this lower filter since there is no invoice yet in this case. It's probably not worth searching on that. And we will make use of this one here. We're going to leave it set as no. We're only looking for installments that are missing an invoice. We're going to keep this too because we want to look at a specific date range. We don't want to look at installments that are meant to be created in the future. That's obviously not going to have an invoice yet. Instead, we'll look back in the past. Now, in your organization, this may change. You might want to look at stuff from the last week or perhaps the last month, see if any installments are being missed. To get a nice spread of data, I'm actually going to set ours to the last 365 days. We'll just look a year in the past, see if we've missed anything. Remember, with reports, always to check your display fields to make sure your results are going to be meaningful, as we were doing earlier. And you can see this one here will show us what qualification or course it is, and also information about the installment itself. So this should be fine for what we need. I won't make any changes on this for now. And then we can run our report, see if we've missed anything. As you can see, we've got a large number of installments that we've missed, especially for Xavier here. Some of these were due to be raised back in last year in 2020, but there is no invoice for these. So we're theoretically missing out on this money because the student wasn't actually given an invoice to pay. So like before, we may need to chase this up with our internal admin team. Now to move on to the second question on also what if, well, we have raised an invoice for the student, but we want to make sure that they're paying them appropriately. For that, we need to head back and tweak our filters somewhat, like so. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to keep this top filter and change this to yes, because if an installment doesn't have an invoice, then there's no real point checking to see if that's being paid. This becomes less relevant because we're only looking for things that already have an invoice. So this date just doesn't really apply to us anymore. And then we're going to put back in that invoice date that I mentioned, or specifically the invoice due date. Excellent. Well, having trouble searching for that one. There it is. Invoice due date, like so. And as a bit of an extra insurance, I'm also going to put in invoice marked paid as a further filter, because we only want to pick up invoices that actually haven't been paid yet. So I'm going to swap this to no to make sure we're only targeting them. So we're going to look for invoices that should have been paid at some point in the past. Again, you might want to look back in certain periods like last month or perhaps the last quarter to see what's being missed. Again, I'm going to set ours to the last 365 days so we get a nice spread. If we run this now, this will pull in results, but they probably won't have everything we need. If I go into the display fields, you'll see that there aren't any display fields for invoices, so we won't actually know anything about the invoices that are overdue. So I'm going to add in some further data. We're going to put in the invoice number, so we know what they are, and so the accounts team can find them easily. Invoice number. I'm also going to put in the invoice amount, so we know how much is on there, or invoice balance, I believe, in this case. Yep. And I guess we'll put in also the marked paid there, so we just get a confirmation that only non-paid invoices are showing up. Upon selecting that, I'll hit done, and when we run the report, we should get a different set of results with some further display fields. There we go, getting another return. So we can see here, we also have a number of payment plan installments that have had an invoice produced, but they haven't actually been paid by the student yet. We can see here that invoice marked paid, they are all set to no. And according to the invoice date, which I don't think I've actually put in there, let's go back and adjust that. So basically just taking this due date here, ensuring that's in the display fields. Let's go to due date. Like so, then it'll be part of this grouping down here. Hit done and rerun our report. Easy to go back and forth. There we go, we get further information. And we can see over here that some of these invoices are due to be paid a long time ago and have been since missed. So potentially these students have been cancelled, or maybe the accounts team has just missed them. I'll point out finally that if you go back again to the filters, this also lets you put a status qualifier. So if you want to put in enrollment status, we could, for example, exclude the students who are cancelled because they're probably not going to pay. And if we run this, this will probably shave down our results somewhat. So you can see a fewer names on here as it's now not looking at the cancelled students. That said, we still have some that are well overdue for paying those, and we may need to analyze them. Now, for anyone wondering, it is possible to actually build some automations around payment plans in terms of being able to generate and send the invoices. We've actually covered these previously in some of our earlier workflow webinars. So if anyone interested in that, I recommend you check out the recording of those webinars. They're available on the sign up page, and you can see how we use reports like this to power some of those key automations. That pretty much covers off things looking at finance related to specific students, either for simple invoicing or more payment plan style. I'll hand back to Charissa now. We'll look at some more summarized things.
All right, thanks, Rowan. Okay, so apart from the information about individual enrollment finances, it's often useful to get an overall picture of revenue running through your aXcelerate account. For simple revenue reports, this is simple enough to build up data using a transactions report. So let's go and have a look at this particular report. Okay. You may be very used to the default invoices related report, but I'm going to introduce to you one called transactions. So this is a very expensive list of reports here. So I'm just going to collapse the screen and focus on all the finance related reports sitting under here. All right, so you may be very used to all the invoice related reports sitting up there, but further down the page, there is a transactions report which will return all your payment receipt records from the aXcelerate system. So let's have a look at the warehouse version as usual. And we're going to focus on the transaction date. So as a very generic way of demonstrating, I am going to pretty much run a quick report showing you, say, all the monies received, say, for example, this month or last month, for example. All right. And excluding all bad debts or credit notes. So if I just hit the submit button, you can see from this particular report over here, you are able to see all the different transactions happening last month, and we know capturing the different payment methods, that sort of thing, as well as the amounts. So this essentially is what the transactions report can provide you with. Now, for a more specific scenario, let's have a look at using the transaction report to run some agent or Crycos related reports. If you are a Crycos provider and you manage your agent commissions by allocating a certain amount directly from the student invoice, you can run a report to see how much commission has been paid out during a certain period. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave the transaction date as last month. I'm going to leave the transaction type to as money received. However, the payment method is slightly different. I'm going to delete these selections. I'm going to say including agent deduction. So this is a special an option that we have in our payment method, purpose-built for cry-cost providers. Now, if you do it this way and also include in your display fields the payment description, this is what I've used in my example, just to show you how meaningful or qualitative your reports can be. Go down and run the report. Now from here we can see that 2 results have been returned. A couple of agent commissions have been paid out last month, and through the payment description I can clearly see which agent it belongs to. So this is how you can make the transactions report quite meaningful for cry-cost providers. Also, as seen in our last webinar, a powerful feature in the report builder is its ability to build charts. So in this case, I'm going to use a preset chart to demonstrate this. Going back to the transactions report, I am going to delete the payment method and as well as that, and simply leave the transaction date filter in. I will also set the filter to year to date. So essentially it's going to show me all the transactions that's happened from the very beginning of this year till now. Before I submit the report, I want to look at setting up the chart options up there. So clicking on this button, the only area I'm concerned about setting up is the preset chart option. So all we want to do is to select the combo chart called number and value of transactions. All right, so you don't have to set anything else because this is preset for you. So this is the only field you want to be concerned about when using the combo chart. Let's go down and let's pretty much hit the submit button. All right, as you can see, we've returned some results here. However, it's in a data table. We want to see this as a chart. So we're going to head towards the chart tab and click on it, and it's going to show this in a bit of a graphical format. Looking at this chart, this will very quickly let us know or see trends of a large number of low value payments or a small number of very large transactions. As we can see from here, in May this year, there's only been one transaction. However, it has a total value of $12,000. So that's quite a significant transaction over here, which tells you that that's probably a fee for a full course. Moving on to the next month of June, we've got 4 transactions. However, that's totaling a value of $5,300. So this could indicate that there might be payment plan installments or short course payments. So you can see from the combo chart here, rise and falls of the different value amounts. Once we're confident with the results, it's of course best to save the entire report for your later use. So to save a report, we are pretty much going to simply click on the save button and rename the report accordingly. So I'm just going to call this very simply year to date, and also always a good habit to share internally. Say yes and submit. Now, once you've saved this report, you can pretty much put it onto your dashboard. So let's have a look at the dashboard. All right, so if you haven't been using dashboard widgets, you can now add a particular widget called the Save Report Chart. So a list of widgets will pop up, and we are really concerned about the Save Report Chart here. So let's add this to your dashboard. I'm going to move this widget up here, so you can move your widgets around to place it to wherever you want it to. And we're going to start building the Save Report Chart by clicking on the cogwheel icon up there and selecting the report that we've just saved, which is this one. We're going to hit the Save button, and you can see the report is now appearing on your dashboard. Now, I'm sure you're going to get very excited here knowing that you can now place these sort of graphs and charts on your dashboard. And because you can have more than one chart widget on the dashboard at once, you can start building up a finance or financial summary using several saved finance reports in a similar fashion. Now, before you get overly excited, please be aware that the maximum number of charts you can have on any one user's dashboard is 13. So once you've hit 13 chart widgets, you will be prevented from adding any more charts. So you want to choose the most meaningful reports on your dashboard. And that pretty much wraps up how to create finance reports or charts that can display onto your dashboard. Now we're going to move on to very quickly, Rowan's going to take you through a quick overview of VET student loan related reports.
All right. Thanks, Charissa. So, VET student loans, for those who may not be familiar, is effectively the federal loan scheme for students in the VET sector studying courses. So, not all of you may be running this program, but for those that do, there's often a question that comes through on running reports related to VET student loans. It being a debt program, it does work a little bit differently. So, looking quickly at the system, the majority of VSL, VET student loan data, is actually uploaded out of aXcelerate through our integration with the taxi system. So you're able to set up and aXcelerate the allocations of debt against people's courses and then report those out to the taxi system so that the government knows how much the student is incurring and charge them debt accordingly. Often the question that will come up from this is what kind of reports we can run on that, specifically about the revenue side of things. So in this relationship, the government is often paying the RTO directly while they manage the debt that the student would have otherwise been using to pay for their course. Now, in terms of tracking the debt, that can be done to some extent in the report builder. If we look in here, we have a dedicated one for this. It's called an ours module enrollments. Like so. In your account, this may be called cluster or unit of study enrollments, but it is effectively the same thing. And this can show you information about the units of study, which are the broken up allocations of debt for the student. However, this is a limit if it only really tracks that debt and what's been reported out of there. Incoming revenue, the money the government pays your company directly, is actually tracked externally through a system known as HITS. And we do not actually have a direct integration with that there. So there's no real feasible way to feed those kind of payments back into aXcelerate. It don't know what the student's on debt for. It doesn't know what you're getting paid from the government for that. So because of that, we don't really have a report that can track that information, that kind of revenue, as there's literally just no data in the system to find. That said, do keep in mind that pretty much all of our reports, once you've run them, all the ones you've seen today, can actually be exported in a different format. So if I, for example, head back to the finance area and open up that transactions report, we've seen before that this can show you the revenue from kind of all sources. So this could be theoretically everything except the HITS payments that you're receiving. And so we could run one of these for, say, the current year or the transactions like so. And once you have a report, you can then export it in an Excel or CSV format. So you could get the majority of your payment data out of aXcelerate as an Excel CSV, and then pull the HITS information on by just copying it onto that spreadsheet. That way, at the end of the day, you would actually have a combined value of all your transactions, the majority of which aXcelerate knows about, but for those extra ones, they can be added to an exported Excel file. That's about it for VSL though. So yeah, just keep in mind the unit of study-based report and the ability to export if you're looking to track more revenue.
All right, so that pretty much wraps up today's webinar on creating meaningful finance reports. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to use the report builder more effectively and run some financial statistics within your aXcelerate account. If you've popped in any questions in the chat room, we'll be putting together the responses to your questions and send those out very shortly. This brings us to the end of our webinars and reporting and the end of our live webinar series as a whole. This isn't to say goodbye though. You may be seeing us in future webinars or presentations with different focuses and durations. So please keep an eye out on the Heartbeat newsletter that's found on the aXcelerate website, which you can subscribe to, and your inboxes for information about any of our future projects. Thanks so much for joining us.
Excellent. See you around, guys.
See ya.